you, Buck, had come up with a blasting ordinance at the last meeting, and I got a hold of it and basically turned it into ordinance form. The only thing else that I did was, I forget what chapter you had suggested, and I suggested 91 to put it in alphabetical order.
It was like right after the noise ordinance or something
Yeah,
like that.
that's
So
that's
and it
the
was an
only
opening
thing.
there.
That's the only thing that has changed. I haven't done any other improvements to it or changes or anything else.
I read it, I just suggested it went in that spot because they had it in numerical order, they left gaps there, so I was like, well, that makes,
Yeah,
so.
it's just a codification issue, it wasn't substantive.
Right.
So, I mean, if the commission is okay with it, your next step would be to recommend it to the board of supervisors.
Are you good with it?
Yeah, I recommend we send it on to the supervisor.
You make a motion?
I do.
I second it. All in favor? Aye.
Second,
went a lot faster.
let's see. Next is the discussion of the impact reports. So this again is very similar, Buck. You had put together a draft that involved sort of taking some pieces from other townships with regard to different impact studies that you would like to see as part of the subdivision and land development ordinance.
I want to say something about it real quick, if it's okay. Just for, there's a lot of people who weren't here. This one's, the other one's a blasting ordinance. There's, what can we say? There's not much to talk about. Right, but, because we didn't have one at all. So this impact study that would be required for developers, it was brought up at tonight's meeting here. It goes into what type of litigation a developer's been in for a long period of time. It goes into anything they're currently involved with, licenses pulled, that type of stuff. They're required to do an impact study on how the school districts are going to be affected. Things like that. So it's a pretty strong impact study. Again, any of these developments is going to affect us in a financial manner. I mean, we need to know. And at bare minimum, state law states that they can do certain things to their property, and we can only do so much. But I just want anybody who's going to come in and put a lot of do that, it's going to affect your tax dollars. I want them to look us all in the face and say, hey, this is going to cost you. And it might even benefit them. It could show. It might make you a lot of money, but we need to see that. So that's what this is about.
Yeah, so just very quickly, it requires a developer financial disclosure statement that has certain information that has to be provided. An impact assessment, which talks about, that's more of like existing conditions, natural features, that sort of thing, but it includes a fiscal impact, which would be an analysis of the cost on the township. It requires an educational impact study, which is the school district and what impact it's going to have on the school. Transportation impact study, and also, nope, that's it, transportation impact study. So the other thing that this goes along with that I need to bring to your attention, there's actually a couple. So number one, you had, I think, recommended that it be in Article 2, and my only comment was I was recommending that it be Article 2A, right up front, but just so that we don't have to go through and change all the cross-references throughout the ordinance, because
Right
that
after
would
the
become a nightmare.
definitions.
Right, because otherwise it will become a nightmare trying to figure out what's cross-referenced to that and what isn't. The other thing is, the other thing is, there is a provision in the zoning ordinance, specifically 285, that required some impact statements that are part of the zoning ordinance to also be provided as part of the subdivision and land development ordinance. And I'm recommending at the end of this ordinance that we change that section so that that section only refers to the relief being requested under the zoning ordinance, so that we keep them separate. So there will be things in the zoning ordinance that will require some other studies, like a traffic impact study and things like that. Like if you're looking for conditional use or special exception, there will be certain conditions where that stuff would be required and it would proceed under the zoning ordinance. This would come into play when you're looking at a subdivision and land development. So I just want to make it clear, because I think I think it becomes too confusing if you have one set of standards in the zoning ordinance for these kind of impact statements, a separate study in the subdivision and land development ordinance when you have sort of like a crossover. So that's why I wanted to change that section to just make it applicable to the zoning ordinance.
Right. And that's fine, I figured we were gonna delete the one in the zoning.
And that's something that we can do. You tell me how you want to do it. There is a number of sections that are that have references to those. So the only reason that I didn't delete it completely is because there's probably 5 or 6 different sections in the ordinance that refer to these impacts.
No, it's there, to me it makes sense what you did.
But, I mean, certainly if you guys want to delete it, we can do that too. Just delete it from the zoning ordinance and have it only in the SALDO. That's up to you. The difference is, if you do it that way, when you have a conditional use or a special exception, you're not going to get a report with that unless it's also a land development.
Right.
So that was also part of the purposes for keeping it separate.
Oh, I think that's acceptable.
Okay, it's up to you, then you guys make the decision. So the next step will be the same thing for you to recommend that it go to the board.
Why didn't we have
supervisors.
one sooner?
Because we weren't here.
Well, there were
I've been
some,
here for a whole year.
there were some in existence, but.
And they just, never mind.
Okay, so I move we send the impact study to the Board of Supervisors.
Do we have a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the third thing on here is something that came up a little earlier during the discussion of the development, but something also that is not present within your ordinance. So there's been some discussions surrounding that particular plan that was submitted as to whether or not you could have rejected it when it came in the door as not having certain requirements. You currently, under your subdivision and land development ordinance, do not have a provision that says that. You don't have a provision that says it's reviewed, cursory when it walks in the door, and if it doesn't have everything that's included, you can return it within a certain amount of time.
Doesn't that fall back on the MPC though?
The MPC doesn't have anything in there either about rejecting plans outright when they're first submitted. The MPC only talks about the time clock for reviewing the plans in their entirety.
I'll tell you, then I commented about this before, and I said a lot of this is bigger than just, our township, but this is what they're teaching us in
Understood.
school. And I have stacks of papers.
There's a disconnect.
That actually shows where I pull it up
I
from.
understand that, and there's a disconnect between exactly what's written in the MPC and how the courts have interpreted it over the years. And somewhere that's getting lost. Because yes, you can read the MPC, but the MPC is also, how these things are interpreted are also guided by case law. And there's times when the case law has been infused into the MPC, and there's times that it isn't. And this is a time when it has not been. So I sent to you some sample language from some other townships of something that we could put into the SALDO that would give you the ability to do this. Because what the case law says is, you gotta have something in your SALDO that says you can do it, number one, and you have to do it in a reasonable amount of time. So what's most common is like 14 days, somewhere around there. And it's typically done by either, the township secretary, the township zoning officer, or the township manager. And then what happens is, it's their job when it comes in to look at it and look at the checklist and look at the requirements in the SALDO and make sure that everything that's supposed to be part of the submission is there. If it's not, it's then that person's job, whoever it is, to send a written letter back to the applicant with the plans stating what the deficiencies are and what wasn't provided as part of the application process. So that's sort of the way that it goes, through the case law. So if that is what you're interested in being able to do in the future, when other plans come in, it's something that we need to incorporate into the SALDO. And if you're interested in that, the next step for that would be for me to basically put it into an ordinance form. Because right now, all I did was give you some sample language from some other townships about what they have currently.
Right. It's interesting, in a weird way, you might think this is funny, but it's like, and I get it, and we should do this, but it's almost like saying we need another law stating that you have to follow the speed limit signs.
I'm not saying that I disagree with you, I understand your point.
You know, it gets a bit redundant, because it's all in our saldo, and, when you.
I got you.
when you
I'm
look
only
at
telling
it.
you the way that the law is going.
Right.
I can't tell you why they haven't incorporated it into the MPC, but this is the way the courts have proclaimed
Right.
it to be. So in order for you to be able to follow that, you need to have this language to be able to do that.
It's just, the courts are just establishing precedents.
Exactly. Well, they're in charge of interpreting the MPC. So the MPC is written and they're the ones who say this is what it means. So I understand that that's not, it seems kind of counterintuitive, but
It's a shame we
that's
couldn't
what has
send-
been ordained from on high. And we can try and fight the machine, but it's,
Or lobby the legislators.
well, the hard part is the builder lobby is very, very big. And that's why the MPC is written currently the way it is. It's very favorable to developers, and it's because they have the money and they have the ability to stand up there in Harrisburg until someone listens.
Right.
So, and unfortunately, townships have a lobby, it's just not as strong.
Right.
So, if you're interested in doing this, if you have a favorite, if you looked at them and you have a favorite, I'm happy to use that one.
Which one legally is the most effective?
Now you're asking me to make predictions, I'll get out my crystal ball. I am not aware of any specific one of these having been challenged in any way to be able to say, this one stood up in a court of law. Some of them are much more wordy, some of them are short and to the point. I would recommend, like this one, it has a short requirement, this only says 5 business days. The one says 7 days. I think that you would be safe with one that was somewhere around the 14-day mark, but I wouldn't go past that. I
Okay,
wouldn't say any
14
more than
days is
that.
perfect. Right? That gives us enough time to look at it and see if there's deficiencies, and then
Right, and just to clarify, it's not you that looks at it, it's whoever the administrator is that you want to do it. Either the zoning officer or the township manager or the township secretary, whoever you think is most appropriate to do that. The only thing that I would caution with is because your zoning officer is not in-house, it may be a little bit harder to get them to do the cursory review. But Sean may look at me and say, I'm not comfortable doing it as the township manager, I'd rather be the zoning
Could the
officer.
language be the township manager or their designee?
Sure, certainly,
What I found works out pretty well too is state township representative.
we could do that as well.
Because this way it gives you the latitude, if you have a background in that and you're like, no problem, I've got this. Even John Cupp, great zoning officer, but just because he was a zoning officer, I don't always think that that might be the best person to do that.
Correct.
Especially depending on what type of, sorry. Township, studies or whatever that might be
Sure.
involved. With something like that just came in, there's a lot of information that would be applicable there. But that's up to you. I have seen it before, we've had it before where they'll get an application in, we will get it, we'll look at it, and then notify, put a letter together and send it. So we have done it before,
Right.
but there's not one right answer. It just depends on the staff that you have and how comfortable they are looking at something like that.
Right, and it differs, because if you have a bigger township, you might have an in-house zoning officer who does it,
Right.
every day, but,
Yeah, if it's a minor subdivision versus
Correct.
280 townhomes.
right, there's certainly a degree. So, the bottom line is, if you're okay moving forward, then you can authorize me to prepare an ordinance to come back to you at your next meeting. And then if it's acceptable to you, if we don't make any changes, you would then move it on to the board.
all in favor?
That wasn't a motion, I can't make a motion.
I can make a motion.
Sorry.
I think you should move forward.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Are you making a motion?
Yes, I am.
I second it.
We're gonna,
All right.
all right.
All in favor? Aye.
And the replacement septic system is not me. I don't know what that
That's
was.
Norm.
That's Norm. Okay.
So currently, the reason I asked to put this on the agenda was that I got a phone call for someone asking me about, it was a possible subdivision, and they were asking me about replacement septic systems. I'm like, well, I'll have to look, got 4 townships, I don't have them committed to memory. Upper Fred does not require a backup septic system, okay? I believe in any township, you should have a backup septic system location.
Mhm.
But in particular, Upper Fred, I mean, your soils here are not good. I've got to believe that you probably, I don't know if there's anybody in the township that might have an in-ground system. It's so sand-bound at best, and depending on your perk rate, it could be pretty large. Well, you go in an R60 or whatever, and you've got an acre and a half, and you have your primary septic system, and some people earlier today were saying, I've been here 40 or 50 years. You're getting 40, 50 years out of a septic system, you're doing pretty well. But since then, they've put up a pole barn, they've got some landscaping that's in, and now all of a sudden, you have a septic system that fails. You want to make sure that you could have two legitimate septic system locations, because if you talk about a drain on somebody's bank account, if they've got to go to pump and haul, where they don't have a septic system that works and they don't have an alternative, not a good situation. And not everybody that's buying a home, either new or whatever it might be, they could be a teacher, an electrician, whomever that is not familiar with what we're even talking about. And to not have a backup septic system, I think it's important for township's ordinances and the staff that's here to protect the residents. And to me, I definitely think you should have a backup location. Now, here's the other part that'll probably perk everybody up. It takes up space. So when you go and you have to go and perk for a particular piece of property, whether it be 10 acres, 15 acres, 20 acres, you may not be able to get as many lots out of that. Decreases your density. Go along the lines of other people we're talking about, public water and, public sewer, or private water and public sewer, and we're basically just depleting the aquifer. Well, it's another way to decrease your density and keep your septic on your property.
Do you have an ordinance that you like from one of your other townships?
Oh, it could just be as simple as a sentence or two. Insert it at the right place, I could find it for you for sure, that's not a problem.
Are you talking about for like new construction?
Yeah.
For anything that triggers subdivision or land development.
Right,
So
okay,
it's-
so not,
You lived at your house for 30 years, it doesn't mean you have to find it.
right, that's so.
No, just new.
Yeah.
No,
Just new.
but for everybody who's in that situation, if you've had a septic system that fails and you can't find a backup system, you're in a world of hurt. I mean, not only that, but putting in a septic system these days has gotta be 20, 25 grand.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and part of sitting in this chair or sitting in those chairs is looking out for people who don't know the question that they should be asking.
As long as it's for, future homes like that, and doesn't affect what's existing, I mean.
Well, let me state the part that might, cause you pause for concern the most. Let's say, we just had, I'm not gonna put a name out there, but we just had a subdivision that came in where they wanted to chop a lot off. They had, might have been 10 acres, and it was an existing home, and they chopped a lot off for the child, okay? That lot that is created needs to have a backup septic system, but because it was involved in a subdivision, again, it can be waived, okay? But the existing home would need to find a backup septic system location, okay? Now, that certainly is something that's waivable, because you could almost look at it as existing non-conforming. It's an existing home. But again, I'll still always make that argument that you're only helping that person out. Because if they go and they say, oh, this is a beautiful spot, I can put my, 20 by 40 pole barn, and they put it in the only place that you could have a backup septic system, whereas they could have moved that pole barn over here, okay, maybe it's a little bit on a slope and they had to do a retaining wall, but if that ever failed, I guarantee you ask that person that question, they'd say, I gladly would have put my pole barn over here had I known that this is the only spot I could put another septic system. It's never a problem until when you push your plug in the toilet and it doesn't go down.
So wait, I have one question for you though. So you're saying though that if it was subject to subdivision, not only would the new lot have to have a backup, but the existing lot that it was being subdivided off would have to have a one too?
By ordinance, yes,
Okay.
it would.
Could
And that's a classic kind of thing. You talk about a parent tract where you've got a 20-acre lot, you've got a 5-acre lot, and they chop a lot off for a son or daughter or something like that, that you would have them require a backup septic system. Now, having said that, you could have the person come in here and say, look, my cesspool that is in working fine, well, if you talk about your water quality, about your aquifer, a cesspool is not the answer that you want to be hearing somebody having, how they have their septic system. It works, and right now, you know, you can barely scrape two nickels together, I totally get it. But it would be required by ordinance, but again, because it's in the sallow, it is waivable. So if they come in here and they talk to you, it's not a conditional use, it's not a variance, it's not in your zoning ordinance, it would be in your sallow, so it would be waivable. And you can hear those on a case-by-case basis. But I would so much rather see a planning commissioner or supervisor see it in one of our review letters and have to intentionally waive it than it not come up.
Well, and you could even get creative too and say, the main house doesn't have to have the replacement until it's sold to somebody else. You know, something like that,
Right, we
further
can-
on down the road.
We can whittle the
As part of the
letter.
waiver, like, we'll waive it for you now, but as a condition, there's gotta be a note on the plan that says if this property's sold, they would have to do it at that. You know what I'm saying, like
Well,
public,
yeah.
like public sewer and water, like,
Mhm.
sometimes if you've got public water and sewer within a certain distance of you, there's mandatory hookup requirements. And you might not have to hook up because you live there now, but guaranteed, when you sell that house and you go to get a UNO, you've gotta hook up before then you can sell it to the new people. So it could be something kinda similar to that maybe too, but
So, but it sounds like we can mold the ordinance like.
Well, what I always like to do with an ordinance is give the township the ability to make the decision. You'll never see me do something like, you know, it would be really great if you did. They could, or they would be encouraged to, no, it'll be required. And then if they need to, they can request a waiver. It's common. Any plan that you guys review, you're gonna be granted a waiver. Because there'll either be street trees and they'll be like, live on a wooded lot. There's going to be something that comes up. But you need to look at each particular situation, because no two subdivisions or projects that come in here in front of you are gonna be the same. I can tell you what, like I said, you have 10 acres and they wanna chop it off for their child, that's pretty normal. Stuff like that happens. But I would word it such that they need to have a primary and a secondary on each location. They know where their primary is, they need to provide well, this is crazy, blah, 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 whatever that might be. I'll ask for a waiver, sure, then you go right in front of the PC, that's not my decision, okay? But the other reason that it's a good idea to require it even on the parent tract is because at that time, you take a good look at it. And if for some reason, they're creating a property line that if you moved it over 40 feet, you'd have a location where you could do it. Whereas if you've got something deeded, then all of a sudden you said, well, I'll put it over here and I'll have an easement in favor of, oh, that's nuts.
Now, is this something that is done before the property lines are drawn?
Yes, as
Okay,
part of the
alright,
planning
alright,
process,
okay.
absolutely. That's when you want to.
Right, that's what I was.
Because my goodness, you have to come back through the planning
Yeah.
commission to go and move a property line.
Okay.
That's, yeah. So I just saw it, and not only that, like I said, it's win-win. Everybody that stood up here was always talking about rural, keep it rural, I want it rural, keep it rural. Well, if you require, boy, that's a reminder that I didn't expect would be going off in the meeting. I figured I'd be home by now.
someone didn't
Not
silence
for
their
this.
phone.
Oh, my goodness. So anyway, but it's gonna decrease your density, it's gonna keep your water